Time for our Sage Week Best Decks video update. Let's go ahead and dive into it, shall we? Kicking off by Jeff's picks this week, we have a little Bass deck that Sage fits quite perfectly into. At face value, a lot of people had questions about including Sage inside of a deck playing Bass, and she obviously encourages you to have lots of varying power costs at a given location. That being said, the way a Bass deck tends to play out, that does happen because you're not basting absolutely every card that you play. It's also worth noting that in the games where Bass gets applied to Sage, she only needs 2 or 3 things at her location at 7 or 9 points of power, which is solidly above rate, and she regularly breaks into the double digits in this deck list, both with and without Bass being involved. Sage, I think, works quite well in tandem with US Agent, another recently released card that I've been a huge fan of because they are both low cost cards that encourage you to play them out on turns 5 and 6 when you already know what the board looks like. This deck list is quite good at swarming the board and leveraging its namesake, since all of our growers have low base power that Bass can push up to start. One notable piece of technology in this deck that I think is important to call out is the inclusion of Snow Guard. There are specifically a lot of decks playing Magic for Limbo in the format right now, and I think all of those decks go over the top of the numbers this deck can generate, which makes Snow Guard a key disruptive piece in ending the game on turn 6 if Limbo is out. As far as higher tier card substitutions go, I think you could easily substitute out Sage, US Agent, and Havoc for other cards that provide disruption or stats that work well with Bast. My primary recommendations for these would be Wolfsbane, Hitmonkey, and Goose. Snow Guard, primarily there to remove Limbo, so substituting it for another card that could disrupt a location like Scarlet Witch or Nocturne works just fine. Jeff could easily substitute for Nightcrawler, and Elsa Bloodstone and Kitty Pryde, I think, are the two higher series cards that are absolutely must-haves if you want to play this deck at anywhere close to its proper power level. My second Jeff's pick this week is a Silver Surfer Gambit combo deck that looks to exploit the fact that there are a number of go big decks in the format that just completely ignore what their opponents are doing. I think this combo deck is the absolute biggest fish in the ocean that goes over the top of all of these other linear shells. Basically, what this deck looks to set up is you play Wong into Mystique, into Gambit, into Absorbing Man your Gambit, and just motor gun down the opponent's entire side of the board. This deck list also has a backup plan of Silver Surfer with Absorbing Man in tandem with Brood and other 3 energy cards for when that full combo plan doesn't come together. One thing that I've been really impressed with when playing this deck is that it's not just dead to opposing disruption as well. One really slick combo that it gets to set up is you can wave into Sarah on turn 4, play Onslaught into the Sarah path on turn 5, and then your Wong and Absorbing Man costs 2, your Mystique costs 1, and your Gambit costs 1, and then on turn 6, you could play your full combo out in one swoop, catching your opponent off guard and never even giving them a window to interact with you. Belong to our high potential category. We have a roundup of deck lists that have really impressive stats on the untapped tracker so far post Infinite, but I have smaller sample sizes. I think any of the decks in this category could be our next breakout thing if they start seeing more play and retain the powerful performances they currently have. We kick off our high potential category with a Claw Onslaught deck that's looking to unlock the power of one of our latest OTA changes. Claw now gives +8 to the location to its right, which means just Claw into Onslaught gives you 11 power in one location and 16 in another, which is a pretty impressive amount of stats. The rest of this deck list is looking to leverage other powerful ongoing effects with Onslaught, such as Miss Marvel, Iron Man, Ant-Man, or even US Agent, thanks to Luke Cage making Agent's effect be completely one-sided. I also absolutely love the fact that this deck gets to leverage Jean as a disruptive element alongside its various movements cards, Nightcrawler, Jeff, and Nocturne, who not only can fill up the Jean path for us, mitigating her downside, but they can also fan out over the board at the end of the game, making Miss Marvel a lot more flexible in where she's adding her stats to. As far as higher tier card replacements go for this one, I think you could swap Nocturne out for another 2 or 3 energy card that you can deploy to the board early to make activating Miss Marvel easier, and US Agent could definitely sub out for something like Maximus that you can play in the later turns of the game for a reasonable stack of stats. Up next, we have a Ravona Lockout deck list making the high potential category, featuring our latest card release in Sage. This deck list not only uses Ravona to accelerate out Professor X ahead of curve, but between Sage, Wolfsbane, and Angela, it has a lot of cards that grow up fairly large in stat lines that start out small enough for Ravona to provide a critical discount for them. This deck list's small Lockout sub-theme a la White Widow and Green Goblin allow it to leverage Cannonball at the top end for a powerful piece of interaction and disruption. As far as higher series card swaps go, I think you can substitute Cannonball for Shang-Chi to be serviceable in a lot of spots. Jeff can turn into Nightcrawler. Sage or Nebula could turn into Havoc or some other cheap card that provides stats that works with Ravona. White Widow can turn into another on-rate 2 energy cards such as Lizard, with the core not replaceable series 4 and 5 cards in this deck definitely being Ravona, Hope Summers, and Kitty Pryde. Our next high potential deck list is a variation of Patriot Ultron, an archetype that has been struggling in other places. I think this particular list has potentially solved some of the issues that it's been having. Most notably, it's leveraging our latest season pass card in Blink as a means to add consistency to find its top end pieces. This archetype often lives or dies by whether or not it's able to come up with Onslaught or Ultron, whichever is better in the current situation before the game ends. And Blink in tandem with Mockingbird as a 5 energy card makes it so we can dig up a 6-drop that's still buried in our deck with more consistency. One thing I really like about this particular build of the deck is that thanks to things like Squirrel Girl and Mysterio, the deck does a good job of going wide on its own organically, meaning that you can often fill the board up for your cards like Dazzler, even when Ultron is nowhere to be found. As far as higher tiered substitutions go, unfortunately, I think both the Series 5 cards in this deck, Blink and Mockingbird, are likely necessary for its performance metrics to keep up. Our last high potential deck list is a weird destroy variation with a few different sub packages going on. Starting off, we have the Hood Sentry Annihilus package, which does an excellent job of disrupting the opponent's board by clogging it up and also providing efficient stats. We have Mockingbird in tandem with things like Squirrel Girl and destroy things that leave bodies behind, like Bucky Barnes, to make her cheaper. We have Lady Deathstrike kind of working interchangeably with all of these packages, letting us destroy the Void or crack Bucky Barnes for Mockingbird, or just blow up an entire lane full of cards, making our last big stat stick, Death, even cheaper. As far as necessary Series 4 and 5 cards go, I definitely don't think you can play this list at optimal power level without Annihilus being present. Lady Deathstrike, I think, could be substituted out for something like another Destroy card, and Mockingbird doesn't have a clean substitution, but Cull Obsidian or perhaps Crossbones is probably the closest thing you could get to providing stats at an efficient rate in her slot. Moving along to our top performing category, we have Cerebro 3 headlining things for the second week in a row. This deck list might just be the secret sauce you need to dominate this Marvel stat metagame. I think it's easy to see why, from a theory perspective, this deck list continues to put up results. We have a ton of incredibly powerful disruptive cards like Quake, Killmonger, and Mobius. We have tools like US Agent and Valkyrie that can chop opposing paths down to side, while also being able to take our own and scale them up very large, thanks to Iron Man and Mystique occasionally copying him. Bass ties the whole room together by giving us the ability to take our 0 base power cards and pump them up to 3 so they can share in the Cerebro bonus as well. As far as higher tier substitutions go for this deck, if you're missing something like US Agent or Mobius, I'd recommend replacing them with something that costs 3 power. You didn't really need me to tell you that one, did you? Our second top performer this week is an oldie but a goodie. It is classic Sauron Shuri. Sauron did get an additional point of power back in our most recent OTA, which probably encouraged people to revisit this deck list, but I would wager his third point of power is not what is giving it its strong performance metrics. Specifically, I would bet that Enchantress, as a card that not only removes this deck's downside on cards like Typhoid Mary and Red Skull, is critical to this deck's strong performance right now, since there are so many ongoing cards that if you get rid of them, the opponent's decks are really going to struggle, such as Iron Man, Living Tribunal, and others running around in the format right now. Long-term most popular category per Untapped.gg metrics, we kick off with an Electro Blink variation. It is worth noting this category likely has a large percentage because there are a lot of different variations of this deck list out there. This current one I have on your screen was one of the better performing ones per average cube gains, but I do think there's definitely room for experimentation in these 12 cards that likely aren't optimal yet. As far as card substitutions go, I think White Widow or Jeff could be replaced with other proactive 2-energy cards such as Cable or Lizard. Red Guardian can slot into something like Storm, which this deck list supports well thanks to Claw and Doctor Doom, or some other 3-drop with an on-reveal effect. Red Hulk is a pretty easy one to swap out, just using regular Hulk or Giganto or your favorite other big 6-energy thing. The deck's namesake in Blink is definitely not optional for this one. Your deck's going to lose a lot of power if you don't have her to upgrade your Electros into 5 and 6 energy cards consistently, so you're going to have to pony up $10 for Benjamin Brode if you want to play this one. Our next most popular deck per Untapped.gg metrics is Ravonna Professor X Lockout Variations. This particular deck list has lots of ways to clutter the board past the Professor, thanks to White Widow, Green Goblin, Debris, and even Titania hopping across on occasion. While this deck list does have a lot of Series 4 and 5 cards, I do think there's a lot of room for reasonable substitutions where the deck can still operate. Hulk can easily sub out for another big 6-drop like Magneto. Cannonball turns into format All-Star Shang-Chi. Jeff can transport into a different cheap movement card like Nightcrawler. White Widow can turn into a different 2-drop that provides stats like Mojo. And Nebula can turn into a different 1-energy card that you can play on curve nicely, such as Iceman or Korg. The one Series 4 archive card that's definitely essential to this archetype is Ravonna, however, since being able to play Professor X out on the 4th turn of the game with some consistency is responsible for letting you cheese out a lot of wins. Our third most popular deck on Untap right now is none other than a fairly classic Loki shell. This deck list doesn't really need any introductions, but I do think it's worth calling out how much customization you have in this deck list, especially if you're missing some higher series cards. Red Guardian can easily be any other 3-energy tech card such as Mobius or Rogue. Elsa can be something else that provides stats on the board for you such as Collector. Jeff and Nocturne can be another movement-based card like Nightcrawler, or just another efficient card that plays on rate like Polaris. Mockingbird is responsible for providing stats in key matchups, so if you're missing her, you want to substitute her for something like Shang-Chi that could chop your opponent's board down to size. As far as must-have cards in this deck list, Snowguard is really important for keeping your hand size big for cheap with Loki, who obviously is also not replaceable as the deck's namesake. Finally, we close out this video in the popular category with a deck that was promoted from top performing last week, and that is the Blink Darkhawk deck. While the performance metrics are down a little bit on this one as its sample size has grown from hundreds to the thousands of games on Untapped, it still has really strong performance overall. It is an excellent deck list for both linearly pumping out big numbers with its Darkhawk and 6-drop, as well as being disruptive to the opponent draw thanks to Korg and Rockslide. As far as higher tier substitutions go, we have the typical Red Hulk can turn into Magneto or another big 6-drop that you like. Nocturne can substitute for something like Nightcrawler or Polaris, while the key core cards that are not replaceable in this deck are definitely Kitty Pryde, Hope Summers, Darkhawk, and the deck's other namesake in Blink. It's worth noting this week that Hela is not included in my deck list. She would have been the 5th most popular deck if I would have included one more in that category, but her performance metrics overall have actually been suppressed a little bit for the first time in a while. I think part of this is related to the fact that Darkhawk has been on the rise, which is a fair deck that's strong against it, but the format's other current boogeyman and Leech is probably keeping Hela down at least a little bit, even if the cube equity in the way that he does that isn't stellar. Speaking of that little green guy, he's definitely sucked a little bit of joy out of the game for me personally, but it is at least worth noting when I shift through the data and the games that don't involve him, there tend to be a good variety in the decks that people are playing, and I personally have been finding success with a lot of things, even Sage, who we can often play out proactively underneath the little green menace. As always, I'd love to know which deck list you're finding success with in the comments down below, and as always, if you enjoyed my breakdown on this topic, be sure to snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any excellent Marvel Snap content here many days of the week.